Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. All right, that was a little more Rocky IV music at the request of Mr. Gaughan to get us ready for this continuation of the Cold War. Okay, so containment, obviously a very important word, should be on our word wall, so let's see who can be the first to get that up there when we come back from break. But this is what the U.S. decides their policy is going to be. So they could have decided in 1945 to overthrow communism, defeat the Soviet Union, and get rid of it. But they realized after fighting the Nazis, fighting the Japanese, it just was not practical. The General George Patton actually had suggested that, but it got him fired, and he died shortly thereafter, which the book Killing Patton is all about, which might be on your parents' Christmas list if they're history buffs. Okay, so George Kennan is the guy's name that came up with this policy. He was an advisor in the State Department to President Roosevelt or President Truman, and he said, let's contain communism, let's stop it from spreading. There's no way we can defeat it, but if we can stop it from spreading, that's going to be in America's interest. So that becomes our new foreign policy here after World War II. All right, and the Iron Curtain speech, which Prime Minister Churchill gave, he was actually ex-prime minister at the time, that he gave in 1946 is kind of considered like the declaration of war speech of the Cold War. We're going to look at that in class on Monday, but that's really the beginnings of the events, which is what we're going to focus on here. After the Iron Curtain speech, where he's referring to basically Eastern Europe as being under Soviet influence, while Western Europe is obviously under American influence, the government gets kind of involved in these two civil wars down in Greece and Turkey, which are fighting between communists and essentially capitalists or the nationalists down there. So this is going to be the first kind of test of containment, where Truman is going to decide how we're going to stop the spread of communism here. So he comes up with the Truman Doctrine, which is what you see over here. Now, we've seen the Monroe Doctrine before. We've seen the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Both of those were basically protecting our interest in Latin America. This is now going to protect our interest in Europe, okay? Where Truman basically says, if you're going to try to spread communism, we are going to use money to support these countries, provide them with weapons, provide them with resources to fend that off. So that's the Truman Doctrine, 1947, sort of our first test of containment. And both Greece and Turkey remained free of communism, so initial results were that it was working. All right. Now, 1948, it's going to get even closer to this Cold War becoming a hot war, and that is with the Berlin Airlift. All right. I'm just going to touch on these events because you're going to read about them a lot more in your textbook. All right. But as we see, Berlin here is in the Soviet sector of East Berlin, and remember, there's no wall up yet. But the Soviet Union decides to kind of put pressure on America. They're going to blockade West Berlin. So this pink, green, and orange areas are going to have a blockade placed on it. Now you notice the whole part of West Berlin is surrounded by communism. So there's no way to get any resources in or out with a blockade, with the trains and the roads being cut off. So Stalin is basically trying to force the U.S. into giving up West Berlin and let the Soviets kind of have that. But if we did, that would be an example of, yes, you guessed it, appeasement. So we decided we had to hold firm. So instead of sending troops in, instead of dropping a nuclear bomb, which we had and the Soviets did not at this point, Truman decides to send in airplanes three times a day. We're going to fly in supplies, medicine, food into West Berlin to keep the city going, all right, and kind of dare the Soviet Union to shoot our planes out of the sky, because then they would be the ones starting this and kind of have world opinion against them. So the Berlin Airlift is going to proceed for a little over a year of just flying stuff in nonstop into West Berlin to keep the country afloat. And eventually, Stalin lifts the blockade, and America kind of wins this little showdown without a war happening. Okay, here's a little closer version here. All right. All right, sorry about that. We had a little interruption, but we're back. All right, so Berlin Airlift, as we already mentioned, you can sort of see the airports that they were flying into here. Soviets had their sector here, and eventually in 1961, the wall will be built around this part of Berlin to keep even more isolated. But we're going to maintain our interest there to sort of have that presence in the Soviet section of East Germany. All right. Now the Cold War turns hot here in 1950. All right. So Truman has won re-election by the narrowest of margins, but he's won re-election, and he's and we're pursuing our policy of containment. Now, since the Berlin Airlift, what has changed, the U.S. has joined NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in an attempt to protect our interests in Western Europe and protect our allies. But also, the Soviets have the atomic bomb. All right, so this is a little bit of a test of the United States and the United Nations. So North Korea, which after World War II, the Allies agreed to split Korea at the 38th parallel. That's a line of latitude for you geography fans out there. North Korea, the communist side, which is bordering with communist China, which had just fallen in 1949 to communism. The North Koreans decided they're going to invade South Korea. All right, South Korea had all the industry. North Korea had the agriculture. So North Korea wanted to unite the country with agriculture and industry and be a united Korea as opposed to divided like Germany was. So North Korea invades, crosses the parallel, unannounced, and kind of in a surprise attack. So Truman decides we have to do something about this. Okay, so General MacArthur, the hero of World War II, is taken over to the UN forces, which are about 93% of U.S. and 7% the rest of the Allies, takes over, and the North Koreans push the Allies and the Americans all the way back here to Busan. They're kind of trapped on the corner of the island. So MacArthur comes up with this very daring idea to evacuate by water, similar to George Washington, and come around and do a sneak attack here at Incheon and trap the North Koreans on the peninsula. And he does. It is a successful invasion because Incheon doesn't have a harbor, has these very steep cliffs and things. Invade, push the North Koreans back all the way to the Chinese border. Okay, so by the end of 1950, MacArthur has the American troops here. The North Koreans are right here at the Yalu River, and the Chinese forces are just over here waiting to intervene. So MacArthur says, well, this is war. They're the enemy. We're going to take the war to the enemy. So he proposes dropping a radioactive wall of nuclear bombs all along the Yalu River here to isolate the Chinese from North Korea and then pursue the North Koreans into China. And you can imagine with the Soviet Union now having the atomic bomb, how risky of a decision this would be. And Truman makes a decision that's pretty much is going to remain our foreign policy ever since then, that we are not going to use nuclear weapons because of the potential fallout retaliation. And he orders MacArthur to stop at the Yalu River and go no further. And this forever changes war because ever since then, America has never used a nuclear weapon. And MacArthur complains and goes public saying, why do we have these weapons? Why are you tying my hands behind my back if I cannot use them? And openly challenges Truman to the press. And Truman, just like Mr. Trump would do, tells MacArthur, you are fired for challenging him. And MacArthur comes home to a hero's welcome. And Truman is going to be voted out of office in we're having the lowest approval ratings of any president up until that point. Okay, so not the best ending here for MacArthur or for President Truman. Truman is going to lose in 1952 to Eisenhower. Eisenhower takes over, basically threatens to use nukes if we're not going to end the stalemate here in Korea. So what they do is they end up agreeing to a ceasefire, or an armistice as it's called, with North Korea remaining communist, South Korea remaining capitalist, and the war accomplishing nothing. And technically this war has never ended, because an armistice is just an agreement to stop fighting. There is no treaty recognizing North and South Korea or anything like that. So technically the Korean War is still going on, which is why we pay so much attention to what Mr. Kim Jong-un is up to there in North Korea. All right, so that concludes the origins of the Cold War. All right, thank you for listening. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving break. And remember, here at the Kuhn Academy, we're not just learning history, we're making history.